Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Jeff Roroff Kushel, your Poly Alumni Association president and great class of 1999. And on behalf of the entire Poly Alumni Association, welcome back to campus. So this is our 11th annual Alumni Roundtable. So we've been doing it for over a decade, and one of the cornerstone events of our 2025 Alumni and Reunion Weekend. It's always inspiring to gather with this incredible community. Our alumni represent the very best of Poly, leaders, innovators, change makers, whose talents shape industries, communities, and conversations around the globe. Whether in science, education, the arts, business, public service, or countless other fields, your work exemplifies the enduring values of this institution. Our alumni live out our shared vision that a poly education is not just a preparation for personal success, but a real call to action to contribute meaningfully and measurably to the world around us by leveraging their influence to inspire change, uplift communities, and make a meaningful impact. And as I look out at this room, I'm especially encouraged to even see students, our future alumni who are here to listen, learn, and carry out that vision. So before we get started, just a brief poll around this particular topic, which is, I think, timely to many of us. Um, who lost a home in the fire? Whose home was impacted by the fire? Who knows someone whose home was impacted by the fire? Yeah, so I think all of us recognize that this wasn't a small situation. This was, it made global news. This was a big deal, not just to this community, not just to communities around Los Angeles, but throughout the country and around the world. And I can say from firsthand experience, that moment when you find yourself and your wife and your 8-year-old without a home and without any belongings that you've gathered over decades, and you realize that everything's been reduced to rubble and ashes. It's a devastating experience. But what I can say is that being part of the poly community with a deeply rooted spirit of contribution, that having that kind of community togetherness at that moment of vulnerability makes a meaningful difference. The outpouring and generosity from faculty and staff and families and alumni was inspiring and really, from a personal standpoint, was moving. And the gym was full with items that had been donated to help faculty, staff, and families impacted. And significant fundraising efforts were mounted within days. And that spirit hasn't stopped in over 100 days since then. So today we're privileged to hear from a group of our fellow alumni who are doing just that, leading the work of rebuilding communities in the wake of the devastating Southern California fires. Their commitment, compassion, and creativity are powerful examples of what it means to turn challenge into opportunities for hopefully lasting change and to rebuild. So please join me in welcoming to the stage our panel of distinguished speakers. Our moderator, Justin Worland, class of 10, Wayne Brandt, class of 80, Lauren Alachi, 03, and Stephanie Kingsnorth, 91.
I joked earlier that I'd never been trusted with turning on the mic before, and proves that I can't be. So good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Moreland, class of 2010. I write about climate at time. I was last year, just speaking on this panel. It wasn't my reunion year, but was just one of the few alumni speaking on climate in a sort of long-term way. We were talking about sustainability. We talked a little bit about architecture and building, but all in this sort of long-term thinking about the long-term challenges. And so it's quite striking to be back here now a year later, this very immediate concern in our community, and to be talking about not climate change, but these issues in a very direct way. I'll just share briefly. I think it would be great to just go across each of us. I usually avoid long introductions, but for each of us to just share a little bit about where we come to this discussion. So as I said, I class of 2010 here. Grew up while I was at Poly in Altadena, and my parents lost their home. So it's one of those odd answers when, did I lose my home? Well, in a way, yes. So anyway, I would love to just go down the line and have a brief introduction about, who you are and how you come to this discussion today.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Stephanie Kingsnorth, class of 91. I am an architect. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have been across the U.S. in what I do and moved away from the area, ended up moving back, buying our first home in Altadena. Have since moved across the Arroyo to La Cañada, but our original home did burn down in the fire. So it's kind of one of those things in terms of what can I do to give back in any way? And that's what's brought me to this conversation, not only the decades of being an architect, but the things I'm involved with to provide a give back to specifically the community of Altadena. What?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Alashi. I also went by Lori in high school, but class of 2003. And I have sort of a similar take as these two where, professionally, I'm trained as a landscape architect and urban planner. And the organization I work at currently is a community development nonprofit that works really closely with underserved communities across Los Angeles to think about how are we building, our cities, our neighborhoods, our built environments in equitable ways. And previous to that, I was in New York working at a place that was really focused on rebuilding after Hurricane Sandy and thinking about that from an ecological as well as a community-based place. And so all of that in the same way as Justin was sort of saying is has suddenly come to roost. My parents also lost their home. I grew up in Altadena. And so I think it's this interesting moment of obviously massive trauma across our city, not just for folks who lost their home, but all of us who are affected. And a moment to really think about what that future could look like as we support the folks in Altadena and in the Palisades. So looking forward to the conversation with Wayne.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's a real honor to be here with our panelists and Justin, our leader, and thank you, Justin, also for not putting my class photo up on the big screen. That would have been rather humiliating, so I'm glad we didn't start there, so thank you very much. Again, I'm Wayne Brandt. I'm the founder and managing partner of Capital Funding Partners. It's my own firm. We're a private equity firm that's focused on real estate investments in the Western United States. I have two other really important community jobs for me that I spent a lot of time with. One is I've been on the board of directors for Huntington Hospital for 12 years. I'm the chair of the Finance and Investment Committee that handles the endowment and all the real estate investments for the hospital. But my other interesting community commitment that I have is I'm serving currently on the advisory committee for the 710 stub. For those that maybe aren't in the area, that's the 55 acres that is currently under development for the city of Pasadena. So we're in an advisory capacity, working with Stephanie's firm to master plan that. And it's really interesting. And we'll talk about on the panel today some of the cross threads between that master plan and what's happening with obviously the devastation of the fire. So again, thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. So the session, we're primarily going to focus on rebuilding, but I do think it might be worth taking a moment just to think about the community response a little bit. And we heard from Jethro about the community response here at Poly, but I just would love a little bit of reflection on the community response more broadly. And Lauren, I know this is a big focus of yours, so I might just ask you to reflect on that.
Sure. I think there's really a couple things to think about when it comes to community response. Obviously, there are many people, organizations that have opened up their homes, their wallets, all sorts of things to really think about how to give immediate assistance to the people in Altadena and the Palisades, but I'm mostly going to talk about Altadena just because it's more of a personal connection for me. I think what I've been hearing quite a lot about is housing. How do we get people in houses? How do we get homes rebuilt? And while I think that is incredibly important and obviously meets a very basic need that everybody has, I think it's really also a great moment in time to kind of consider what are all the things that we define as a community, right? It's not just our homes, it's all the things in between that. It's parks, it's community centers, it's libraries, it's the programs that happen in those spaces. And, you know, there are multiple different organizations and foundations that are focusing on that. But I think there's really this kind of moment of coalescence that we're close to of like, what does the public realm mean in Altadena? What does it mean for people and how can we move forward in that way? Altadena is super interesting in that it has some of the highest levels of Black home ownership in LA County. That's largely in part because of the segregationist zoning policies that were in Pasadena in the 50s and 60s. So that's a very key part of it. There is a huge amount of renters that have sort of lost their homes and have much less recourse than many folks who own their homes in Altadena. And it's an interesting place in both the sort of economic diversity and the sort of ethnic diversity of the state. So all of these things coming together are, I think just as important, maybe not just as important, but are, the long-term importance of community that can build on, how do we think about housing, all those things. I think something that we talked about when we prepped for this was, what's the right level of like moving fast and what's the right level of like understanding that we have a moment to think about improving too. And so I think that's something that we'll get into as we talk a little bit more on the panel as well.
And I think one thing with that is how we all define community. It's really a big topic that I know we're all seeing personally. The community, as I define it, of Altadena in terms of the people and the places and the businesses, we've all seen how tight that is, right? Like no one can deny Altadena the fact that there was the immediate, what do we do? How do we do this? Whether you're getting together at Fair Oaks Burgers or the Arco gas station or wherever your moment was to come together, that's community. But we also have to talk about community on a broader scale. And this has also been part of our conversation in terms of what does that mean? Because community is not just your immediate, it's your broader. And in all honesty, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the failures is the grassroots, it's there. The people, it's there. The immediate nature of it, it's there. But the reality of LA City for the Palisades versus LA County for Altadena and that broader sense of what does community mean? LA County is gargantuan, LA City is smaller. There's a sense of scale when it comes back to the conversations about community. And that's just one of those aspects of what's worked, grassroots, small scale. I think everyone is seeing all the Facebook posts, the Instagram posts, whichever social media you're on, everyone has rallied. But then the cry for, but who's going to help us at a larger community scale is one of those questions that a lot of people have. And that even goes up to the federal government with FEMA. So when does community become community versus when is community a resource that everyone is looking for how to do what we're talking about doing?
I think I'd cut it this way. I think we're going to start with what is the definition of community and kind of the immediate response, as Jeff kind of referred to, take us there. But I think as we work through the panel, we're going to talk about going forward and solutions, which is, I think, a very active part of, what we're seeing and kind of real time. But just from my perspective, from a healthcare cut, in terms of what we how we saw the Huntington Hospital respond. I mean, it was just remarkable. So we kind of took a page out of COVID. I just want to take you back to those, very, kind of devastating moments as the fire was unfolding. But the hospital itself has some pretty severe devastation. 47 staff members lost their homes, 13 of which were physicians. Within about 12 hours of the fire's beginning, our CEO got in touch with the board of directors and said, we're going back to our, kind of our command center. Everybody's, back at the hospital, ready to receive the intake. And while doctors and staff members' houses had just burned, they were there on staff doing 72-hour shifts to help the intake. We had 300 cases coming in, a lot of it trauma, and then many of that, continued for weeks beyond. So within 48 hours, there was an amazing response from the hospital. So everything that we're hearing about here, and how even Polly's, responded, this is grassroots. And I just want everybody to know that this community has such great healthcare and passionate caregivers, and that in moments like this, whether it's COVID or the fires, it's really just heartwarming to see the kind of response that, we have here from a healthcare perspective. So we took care of our seniors. We provided, basic services for those that were, momentarily displaced. And so anyway, that's what this community is capable of. And so I think that's what we're looking forward to building back, from there to where we're going.
Well, that all lays the ground for so many threads to pull for the rest of the conversation. And I want to maybe start, Lauren, you mentioned this point about speed and strategy and this tension, because everybody wants to rebuild quickly. People need to get back into homes. And also, this is an opportunity to think about what the community looks like in a strategic way to build not just for the next few years, but for decades, for the next century even. So how do you think about this tension? How do you resolve it?
No, I can't. Yeah.
Yeah, you resolve it for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Next supervisor, I'm out. No, I do think it is like a very sensitive, like, knife's edge to be walking there. I certainly don't think that just because Altadena and the Palisades have suffered this massive disaster, that then they should be forced to atone for all of the sins of LA's urban sprawl in the last 100 years, right? Like, we are not, well, okay. I think there are a lot of things that we could do differently, but just to say that these two communities then have to do all of it, I think is quite hard, right? But I do think that there are a couple real opportunities. One, and hopefully I don't get booed off the stage for saying the D word, but density is like, I think, an interesting thing to consider in certain places of Altadena, on the Lincoln corridor, on the Lake corridor of, newsflash, we have a massive housing crisis in the city, in this country. And so how could there be sort of these acupunctural pinpoints of spaces for thinking about transit-oriented development in Altadena? Obviously, climate is a big one. When I was working in New York after Superstorm Sandy, this idea of building massive infrastructure to protect people from flooding was something that was being pushed really hard by politicians, because they just had this fear that as soon as I asked, well, do you want anything to change in your community, people are going to get mad at them. But what we found working in that space was actually people are quite savvy about the trade-offs that come with climate. We all know we live in Southern California. We all know that there are fires, and there are just judgments that we need to make, and how can we make that a safer space to be in while still enjoying all of the things that we enjoy, being close to the mountains, having open space, having trees. These are all really important things to us. So there's a nuanced conversation to be had there. And then last, I think, is this piece about, sort of, as you were getting to, Stephanie, around community narrative telling. What are the stories that we tell about our communities? What are the histories that we tell about our communities? How do we visualize those? Who's telling them? Obviously, this has become a big, topic of conversation in the wake of George Floyd's murder 5 years ago, around like, how do we want to talk about the history of our communities as we go forward? How do we visualize those? So I think those are like three very clear pieces of like ways that we could think about how could the urban fabric of Altadena change in a way that doesn't completely make it look like some other place, name wherever it is. The last thing that I'd say is there is a need for speed, though. I was originally concerned when this first happened that we would totally do what you said. Everyone builds it back as it was. Captain Barger, to some degree, sort of was like, we'll just build it back how it was and everyone will be happy. right? I understand where that comes from a political point of view. Obviously, things are moving a lot, are moving quickly from a county point of view, but from anyone else's point of view, it's like a snail's pace versus like a spry turtle's pace, you know? But the thing that I'm much more concerned about is less that and more that it's actually going to take a really long time to rebuild, and people are not going to have the ability to hold on to their land for that long. That they'll need to, because of all the other financial pressures, sell their land, sell it to a developer. We're already seeing a lot of overseas developers come in. And how can there be a way of creating, something like a community land bank or a community land trust to help think about, meeting people's immediate financial needs, but holding that land to be able to talk about it in the future for community development. So that was a long, my little soapbox to stand on from.
You solved it. You solved it. Good job.
Great.
Good job.
Yeah.
You're amazing.
Well, it's been at top of mind, so I've been thinking about it a lot.
And I think one thing to add on to that is change is inevitable, right? It's just something that happens over the course of time. So what is it? What does it become? And I think the other thing we all need to be cognizant of is change was already happening prior to the fires. And there was one development in particular, and I think many of you probably know about it. It was a 6-story, if I have my facts right, I'm probably wrong on some of this, so please don't quote me. But along the Lincoln Corridor, there was a development that had already been permitted pre-fire. And so, of course, it came out in the news, oh, this got permitted. And everyone had a knee-jerk reaction because it was different. And so, again, a lot of the grassroots commentary that was going on about it was, okay, wait, you have to understand this was permitted pre-fire. This is not a developer swooping in post-fire to take advantage of Altadena or the location. This was someone who saw the opportunity, the need for housing, the reality of the desire for maybe smaller, not single-family homes, and was doing something about it. So that change was already coming about pre-fire. So a lot of what we were seeing and are going to continue to see, love it or hate it, is some of the opportunity that already existed in some areas of Altadena for further density, further development. We can't knee-jerk against that. We have to kind of think about, well, what was already going on? What were the needs? What were the housing shortages? How can we look at this that isn't just don't change it? So it comes along with change and speed and availability of resources and everything that we're talking about. Change is inevitable. We need to remember that. It's a different situation here because it's forced change, but it was going to happen no matter what in some aspects. So it's just a thread to keep in mind instead of knee-jerking on some of the inevitable things that we see happening in both Altadena and the Palisades.
Would I come in on this question?
Yeah, do you want me to maybe touch on 710 and how it?
Yeah, great.
So I think there's a couple threads here that might be helpful to connect what we've just touched on, kind of preserving our past and change and speed. So what's happening here in Pasadena with the 710 Connecting Committee, advisory. So just to back up, what is this and what's going on? Those of you that maybe are not from the area. So this was the 55 acres from Colorado to California, where Sequoia School is now, what we call the ditch, was relinquished from Caltrans to the city of Pasadena 4 years ago. So this committee's kind of mandate is to come up with a recommendation to the city council. What are we going to build there? We're 2 years into it. And so all these issues just around density and park space and circulation, neighborhood needs, housing, environmental concerns, finance, feasibility, how's it going to be insured, all of this, public-private partnerships, everything that Lauren's kind of touching on and Stephanie is all kind of in the crucible. But I think there's 3 threads that connect what's happening there to what's happening here in Altadena and also a little bit over in Pacific Palisades. So number 1 is displacement. There is a very important need in our community to think about those families that were displaced because of the freeway construction. And many of you have history with this and are part of it. So the committee's been very focused on that. And just like we have displacement in Altadena, we have displacement, here in the South. And that's something that's part of our fabric as a community that we're very, very focused on making sure that those interests, those equity interests are represented in restorative justice and so forth. Number 2, we talked about preserving our past. So what I'm here to say is that committee is very focused on, we need to develop these 55 acres, just like we need to come back and redevelop Altadena Pacific Palisades, but we can't relinquish our past. We have this wonderful community with wonderful tradition. So that's a thread that I think is going to continue to surface, and how we do that, I'm actually quite optimistic that we're going to be able to hang on to our traditions. And then third, and most importantly, which we'll talk about, is creating a future. What does this rebuild look like, and what does it mean to our community, as Stephanie and Laura just touched on? So those three threads are happening in Altadena, but they're also the same three threads that we're dealing with here in Pasadena. So I think they will come together, and will help us build out of what is a very chaotic, situation right now.
One of the things that's come up a lot is the grassroots effort and how strong that's been, and how that's really been, well, it's been the strength that's helped Altadena, through the last several months. On the flip side of that is the challenge that it's an unincorporated community. We talked, I think somebody mentioned the county and the role the county plays. And I guess I'm curious how that structure, what challenges that presents. Is there I don't know, a leadership deficit? I mean, not for any particular leader, but the lack of a mayor who can champion the changes that we need. And then maybe how does Altadena work through those challenges?
Just to start, and then you guys can finish it. But the leadership void, when you don't have power, power will come in and fill that void. And so the power that's come into that void is Catherine Barker. And those of you that have worked with her and know her, she's a force, and she's a one-term politician right now. And so she's putting it all out there, and I think she's doing a fantastic job. So because it's a township, it has a town council, and she has, I think, 28 of these, townships that she's responsible for, but she's putting a lot of her eggs in the Altadena basket. So I really admire what she's doing day to day. I know she's just not getting any sleep, and she's doing the very best she can. But that we'll talk about leadership later, because there's a whole another thread of leadership across LA, county level, city, and then what's happening in the public-private sectors. But I'll stop there. What's your reaction?
Okay, just tell me when to stop. This is one of my big issues with this. That there is leadership present, right? And there's leadership present from the grassroots level all the way up to I'll still call her our supervisor. And I'm going to try not to name names in any of this, but LA County is a beast. It's the best way I can put it. And I work with them professionally on very large scale projects throughout LA County. They're tricky, right? They don't have enough people, they're understaffed. And that came to a forefront in what we're dealing with right now in terms of the response. That is, what do I do? Who do I call? What might that be? Now, in a smaller geographic area that has different leadership, a mayor, that key point person that can push and shove and do that because they've got the connections, it is going to be a different process. Altadena with the town council, best people, well-meaning grassroots. Fighting LA County, I use that term loosely. Please, again, don't quote me on any of this, but fighting the fight that everyone is doing right now, whether you're a homeowner, a business owner, you're representing a parent who lived in Altadena, your child's school was lost. I mean, so many aspects of what we're talking about, right? I'm going to go back to the word we're using a lot, which is threads. That's a lot of threads to pull on. And as you continue to pull on those threads, unfortunately, things start to unravel when you don't have good leadership. So is there a difference? Yes. Is there a dramatic difference between Palisades and Altadena? Yes. I'm going to use an example. And again, I'm going to tell you when, just tell me when to stop. But for example, City of Los Angeles has waived all permitting fees for everyone rebuilding in Palisades. Hasn't happened yet with county. Should it happen? 100%, right? No one should really be forced to pay in this disaster situation to rebuild what they lost. When is that going to happen? No idea, right? The LA County moves at it was a great phrase you used. I don't even know whether you're the snail or the turtle or whichever version of it. They move at a different speed because they're so much bigger. City of Los Angeles moves faster. Even though they're large, they're smaller than LA County. So in some ways, this is LA County looking to little sister City of Los Angeles to say, what are you doing? Oh, that's a great idea. Hey, why don't we do that? These kind of things. So the leadership aspect is a huge question, and it is going to continue to take those who are grassroots rising, in my humble opinion, to assist supervisors, all the rest, and be an additional voice because I'm sorry, one woman, as amazing as she is, cannot do it by herself. And that's where the grassroots is going to continue to have to do what it is and be what it can be and become what it can be with grassroots leadership assisting the entity that is this mega that we're dealing with. And then as I mentioned, don't even get me going on federal and FEMA and insurance and all the rest of the things, but one person can't do it. And so we need that group, and whether it's leaders like Wayne and others who can come together to kind of do the one step up from the town council or however it might be, truly anything we can do to craft the next level of leadership with leaders we already have coming together is probably going to be a huge benefit to the rebuild effort.
Yeah, I can jump in on leadership because, Stephanie's raising a great point. I mean, at grassroots, this is the chaos that's occurring right now. As Aristotle said, from chaos to order. And the way we get to order is that we have to, I'm a very big believer on public-private partnerships. And so I just want to touch on leadership, kind of what's happening in the private sector that's coming around and serving, the city, the county, and the communities. Because there's some exceptional leadership opportunities that are occurring in Los Angeles right now. And I go back to leadership examples like 1984 Olympics. We came together as a community, private, public support for an amazing event. After the Northridge earthquake, amazing public-private partnerships, COVID, public-private. So this city, when it comes together with its financial resources, its intellectual resources, is really formidable. So let me just start with Project Recovery. And some of you, I was speaking with Jennifer before the call, before our panel, who attended one of the meetings from ULI where the recovery project master plan was presented. So what's happened, I mean, there's basically, there's two forms of aid. There's the, community-based organizations, which is what we're talking about, philanthropic, and then there's the public-private partnership. So there's a consortium of ULI, UCLA, USC Law Center coming together on what's called the Project Recovery. And so Steve Soberoff is the mayor-appointed Project Recovery, czar. And so this report that was presented by that consortium was accepted by Steve Soberoff on, April 10th, and the mayor as this will be our master plan. And we'll get into some of the specifics, but just the leadership component, I think, is really, really important to understand. So, its purpose is to provide a trusted partnership with the city, county, and the communities. Leadership is aligned, safe, fast, reliable, and understandable recovery. But it starts with UCLA, Stuart Gabriel, who's one of the preeminent affordable housing economists in the country. USC Law School, Richard Green, Lou Horn, who lives in La Cañada. Some of you may know him. He's the vice chairman of CBRE. He's running this whole kind of project recovery effort. And from there, it's also as part of the project, Rick Caruso, and many other, private organizations, Oak Tree, Brookfield, Netflix, Microsoft, Gensler, this amazing committee of task force of folks that have contributed time and money to creating the idea around a public-private partnership. So the verticals that are coming with the recommendation, and Lou Horn's available to meet with anybody to get at where, what are the solutions here. You can download the ULI 200-page document that has everything that's being specified for, there's individual leadership councils on hazmat, permitting, self-certification, supply chain, insurance, rebuilding, finance, infrastructure. So each one of these verticals has a leader that is trying to figure out what is the solution. And at the grassroots, we're not feeling it yet. It's just going to take a while. It's going to take a lot of time. But when the city comes together and volunteers its time and its money, and is trying to do what's best for providing leadership up to the county and the city level and at the state level, I'm pretty impressed with how quickly it's mobilized. So you're not feeling it yet, but I'm optimistic that leadership is going to provide some really good solutions. It's documented. I encourage you to read the document and understand what's coming.
Maybe I'll just add one thing to, maybe two things. It's that to your original question, Justin, not only is the county different from the city from a political perspective, it's also just very differently infrastructurally. So the city can manage and own its, water department, et cetera, whereas the county doesn't. And so in Altadena, there are 7 different water districts that provide water, right? So trying to corral that situation into one unified response is obviously I would not want to be, working in public works right now. That sounds incredibly hard. And so I think there are just some really physical challenges that are different in Altadena than there are in, Palisades or in the city generally. And so in many ways, the supervisor has a much harder road to follow than the mayor does. I also think that what I've been seeing is there's this real opportunity and for sort of coalescing of the grassroots groups, right? Because many of them are working at a very immediate response or a specific demographic, but there have been some larger philanthropic organizations that have been stepping into that space of helping to sort of be the convener of those and helping to sort of organize a unified front or a unified set of asks from the supervisorial department or district. And I think that's really where I'm seeing quite a lot of the leadership at this moment is within that philanthropic space. That's not necessarily at the community-based organization, but somewhere in between that can help bring some real resource and funding into the issue as well.
Well, they already are. I mean, these are community-based organizations. They've raised incredible amounts of money. And some of these you're probably familiar with, like LA Rises, which is founded by Mark Walters and Magic Johnson. Walters is the owner of the Dodgers. They've already committed $100 million to philanthropic interest to help with the rebuild. Fire Aid, many of you probably participated in that, funded $100 million. Steadfast LA, which is run by Rick Caruso, he's pulling his whole group together and has committed quite a bit of funds. Department of Angels is another. Altadena Recovery, Leadership Council, Blue Ribbon Commission. I mean, all of these, which Lauren's talking about, grassroots in this community-based organization framework, are rising up and raising substantial amounts of funds to devote to our community. So I'm optimistic about that kind of leadership as well.
That's great. It was a great exchange. I want to switch gears a little bit in it. I mean, it's great to hear about the funds being raised at that level, but then to pivot back to the earlier point, Lauren, that you made about homeowners starting to feel financial strain, right? It will take time for all of this to happen. People, a lot of people have maybe a year of insurance, housing, maybe they don't have that at all. So I'm curious, what is the fix? How do you make the sort of medium term solutions that are coming down the pike in the months and years ahead relevant for the people who have to make decisions right now? And I guess I would throw in a couple of specific sort of components of that. Stephanie, you mentioned this land bank program. Sorry, Lauren, you mentioned the land bank program.
Okay, we're interchangeable.
So I'd be curious if you talk a little bit about that. But if not that, what are the other solutions that can help people who need to deal with those immediate financial concerns?
No, it's a great question, particularly, in my line of work, I do a ton of community engagement, always talking to folks. And, with these big sort of amorphous long-term questions, I mean, climate change totally falls into this too. How do you talk to people who have issues tomorrow, getting food on the table, paying their rent, all of these things that need to happen in the next month? How do you talk about things that are 50 years or 10 years from now, right? It's very hard to do. And I think really it's finding the hook for what is personally meaningful to them about how to sort of make that direct connection between, the now and the 10 years from now, or the 50 years from now. Who knows? Maybe we won't be alive at that point. And so I think for sort of based on what you were saying too, Wayne, is something I've been thinking about a lot is, there is all this funding. There's tons of money just coming in, but who is making the decisions as to how that's being spent? Who is sort of like putting that plan together? And to me, the real, or obviously this is sort of where my cards lie, but I sort of feel like a people's plan is kind of needed. It's like, how do we come together as a community to think about, what should it look like in 5 years from now? What should it look like from 10 years from now, 50 years from now? What are the mechanisms we want to put in place at this moment in time, whether it's a community land trust, which I could talk about more, or is it some sort of like, how do we build in equity measures into that moving forward? What's the different type of housing mix that we want? And, that decision is either going to be made at the county planning level, or it's going to be made at the level of a community. And I think like having a mechanism in place to start that process now is really important. It might be kind of painful right now, honestly, because folks are dealing with a lot, right? But I think if we wait, that's not going to we're going to be behind the eight ball a little bit. So I didn't really truly answer your question, Justin, because I think there's
let's do two things. One, I'd love to just talk about the land trust, what that might be. And then, part of the land trust, as you'll get into, is it's a solution for people who, need to sell their properties or don't feel like they have the ability to manage a rebuild. So what are the other solutions for people in those circumstances? So first, I'd love to hear about the land trust, and then how do people think about that situation?
Sure. Just to give a little bit about land trusts and land banks, and I'm happy to talk about this more afterwards too if folks are interested. They're both basically similar mechanisms through which you are able to sell your land into a trust that's being managed by either a nonprofit or a government entity that then can hold on to that land, and then sort of the community makes a decision about what to do with that in the future, whether it's to turn it into housing or build a park, whatever it may be. Typically, they're used around preserving natural spaces or around housing. LA County is actually doing sort of the first of its kind, affordable housing land bank right now, which I'm also happy to talk about because I'm working on it. So I'm happy to talk about it afterwards as well. So I think that kind of mechanism of giving people some immediate relief now. Now, are you going to get the same amount of money that you're going to get from a massive developer? No, it's usually a fair market value, but it is some way for somebody to be able to get some financial relief at this moment, but still preserve some of the ethos of what they want with that land. So that's one potential mechanism for rebuilding. And there have been some small efforts towards that. There's a group called Green Line Housing, which is based in Pasadena, that is trying to start that up in Altadena. I know that there are some folks from the state level actually that have been trying to think about what that should look like as well. But it's all been a little bit in sort of fits and starts, or at the level of one specific lot or two specific lots.
And I think that's one of the tricky parts about this, because a lot of time the land trust aspect is an area, right? So not everyone in Altadena is in the same boat as their neighbor. And so there's an inherent question, I think, for many people as we talk about this type of solution. Well, my neighbor wants that, but I don't. What does that mean in terms of how this would move forward? So there is a questioning aspect that everyone needs to respect during this process, is to always ask the question. Because if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, some of these solutions might seem scary, or that's not right for me, it might be right for them. Always, always, always ask. Because the more information, I think there was that crazy thing when I was a kid. It was all about learning. The more you know, right? Does anyone remember that? I'm getting old, clearly. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? But truly, the more you know, and that's been one of the inherent things, and I think you're hearing it in our line of questioning is, but what about, but what about, but what about? Ask. Because if you don't know what a land trust is, or you don't know about some of the things we're talking about, the educational process of learning about it, although it takes time, is important. And there's really a dual track happening here. It's these big questions of in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. And then there's the individual homeowner who's like, but me now. And so we want to acknowledge the fact that this is dual path. This is not one or the other. They have to happen at the same time. And so you'll hear the big issues, but you'll hear the small issues. And we're not saying one is more important than the other. It's just that they have to keep on happening in duality to come up with the solutions that address the now and then address the big questions like Justin's asking to Lauren and the rest of us. Yes, they're both important. Yes, these are opportunities and options. Yes, learn more about them. Now, what else can we do? That's the critical part of these large scale conversations that we're having.
Yeah, and it's interesting in that, we are not the first city to feel like a massive disaster, right? Can I point to any that have done it really well in the rebuild effort? No, not really. At least not in the U.S. So I think there is sort of this also just sort of meta question of like how we grapple with these big climate/man-made disasters and what really is the response. What are some larger structural things that we need to change with our insurance companies, with how we build, how we develop, that should factor into this conversation. Now, is that going to be solved here? Is that going to be solved by Alumni? No, but I think they are things that are worth really studying and understanding and bringing to the fore.
Wayne, I know you want to come in here, but I might just throw this because I think it is such an important point. This question, just refine it a little bit. You go to Altadena, so many signs saying, no developers. But I want to underscore that point you made about the financial crunch and that people will be facing that in a time where developers are a likely solution. So I want to circle back to it once more, and maybe it's just that there isn't an answer, and that's concerning. But what is the, is it the philanthropic? Is there philanthropic capital that can help with this? I mean, where do you see solutions that will allow people to bridge between now and when their house might be rebuilt in 5 years without going broke, frankly? So I'm sorry to throw that back at you, but I just feel like it's worth underlining.
Well, let's go small to large. I think if we can kind of talk through that. And one, I want to point out, not all developers are bad, okay? It really is a piece of misinformation that is out there about don't sell to a developer. Well, there's some very community-minded developers that are present within our community, and they are Altadena or Palisades focused, and they're not here to just, money is always something, right? But it's not just let's make a quick buck and flip it. So there's been a lot of conversation about if you are going down that path, and there's nothing wrong with that because money is absolutely an issue, and if you can't afford to rebuild and you didn't have insurance and FEMA isn't acting fast enough, sell, right? It's the right thing for you as a homeowner to do. But people are looking to sell to the right people. And the bidding war mentality on properties, as we said, there's fair market value, and then there's like, I want your land, in the Cookie Monster voice or whatever it might be, because they want to buy 6 lots together and build a gargantuan whatever. You need to kind of understand how real estate works and who you're selling to and things like that. So that's on a very small scale of an individual owner understanding who they're selling to and not thinking developers are bad. They're not all bad. That's critical. There's a discussion about the SBA loans, and SBA doesn't mean small business only, right? There's small business disaster assistance. And so you can get loaned money to rebuild as a homeowner. You do have to pay it back, right? There's nothing's for free. But a lot of people don't think about the SBA loan program as a way for an immediate way to deal with then a rebuild if they don't have financing or they need the immediate money. And so those are two on the what I will call individual homeowner small scale level. Then there's bigger kind of next step up ways to look at this. And I'm going to give my colleagues a chance to jump in on then.
No, Sam, I think that's exactly right. I mean, first of all, the land bank and the SBA, as far as financing alternatives, these are very accessible and practical ways. And even FEMA, there are dollars available for homeowners to rebuild. It doesn't mean that everything is going to get sold to a master, home builder. They're going to, redevelop the whole neighborhood. That's really not happening. I don't see that. So let's go down to little. Let's go back to little. Like, what are some of the little solutions that are going to be big solutions? I think for both Palisades and Altadena. And if I got down to kind of the personal level with, my classmate, Bridget Ponger, who sadly lost her home in a fire. But if you go through each of these stories and you see, kind of the passionate chaos that's occurring, what I do want to suggest, there are a couple solutions that are on the way. They're not implemented yet, but they are very real. And this is coming from, kind of the master mapping that's occurring. One is creating a central permitting authority. So we're just talking about county versus LA, and they're two very different permitting authorities if you've got to go through that system. So what's on the table right now is a central permitting authority that's probably going to be run by the county, and that would allow just kind of one voice, one approval. Number two, self-certification. And this is something that used to be an old-fashioned way of the way, plans were submitted and approved through a city. And this would mean that with your architect and with your engineers, you can self-certify that the plans are true and correct to the, legal code and specifications. Number three, I think permit suspension and review. So over in Palisades, the governor has suspended, CEQA review or coastal commission. So it doesn't apply to, really what's happening here in Altadena, but that's that removes years of review. And then I think another one is on building costs. It's really, it's kind of this builders alliance where builders are working on a consortium to get building costs down, which we have some bad news there because of surge demand. Prices, and don't throw tomatoes at the messenger, but the numbers I'm hearing, it's like $1,000 a square foot to $1,200, and if you have a really high-end home, probably $2,000. So most homes are only insured for $500 to $600. So the Builders Alliance is builders and in collaboration like Home Depot and Brookfield and others, people would discount and try to do their very best to get cost of materials down and purchase through the cooperative, so that it's kind of a central purchasing, arrangement, and a way to just kind of get that $1,000 per square foot down, hopefully. So that's what's under discussion right now. These are practical solutions that can happen. They take leadership and they take kind of a bigger approach that I think will go down to each individual homeowner that's facing a very difficult rebuild. And there's others that are coming, but that's just kind of the one that we're not solving. The one that we're not solving is insurance. Insurance is a huge problem. And the lenders, without insurance, they can't lend. And we have hazmat issues. The lenders, don't want to lend because we have environmental, you can't get insurance. So that's a really big issue right now.
So I just, if you want to come in very briefly, but we're
Sure.
almost out of time. So I want to
Super
make,
brief.
okay.
So one thing I do want to say is, I'm going to go back to the grassroots, like individual homeowner real fast. One, if you're denied, appeal. It's a huge thing. Appeal your insurance, appeal FEMA, go for it. Hire an insurance adjuster, because you get told no is not the answer. So that's on an individual level. Is back to my previous statement, ask. No does not mean no. Keep pushing on the individual level. I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, that's great. I want to we have like 5 minutes left, and I just want to maybe take a step back and it's come up a little bit, but to really put this conversation in the context of the state conversation around housing, the national conversation around climate, insurance, et cetera. And obviously there's so much there, so many threads to pull on, to use that phrase, but I just give each of you an opportunity to reflect on how this plays into this national conversation, what the implications are, and anything else. We can just go down the line. That's okay. Sorry.
I'm like 5 minutes and I would take all of it. So it's a huge issue. And I think we're coming to see a lot of those come together in the conversation now that we're having about what I will call our rebuild. You've heard the cacophony of things that we're up against, rising costs. What do we do about that? I really hope no one is forced into the $2,000 a square foot to rebuild their home thing. I do large scale commercial, very complicated projects, and we're still in the $1,000 a square foot range. So that type of reality is a reality I hope does not come to fruition for what we're dealing with here. the misinformation, and we had a brief conversation about this of, oh, you need to plant no trees. Trees are bad. Come on. Trees are not bad. The reality of that, the ongoing crazy of the conversations that we have about it shouldn't happen. I'm sorry, fires do happen, right? We live in a world where this does occur. So we're all hard hit by this, but we're not special in this. So again, I'm just going to put there's a factor we need to put into context with this with a blanket of truth and not just as I mentioned earlier, a knee-jerk reaction to it. So I'm hopeful some of the scary doesn't come to fruition. Reality is reality in what we are all dealing with. But again, we're all here to help one another. We're all here at both a grassroots level and a governmental level to assist. And all of these different levels coming together is what the hope is, given the difficulties that are present. I just want to put that out there as there is a shining light. There is no single solution, but the things that are bad, we can overcome. It's just going to take us time and effort to come together to do it.
Yeah, this is
Top that.
I won't even try. Yeah. No, I have a lot of thoughts on this of there's the former insurance commissioner of California was talking about why can't we just be suing the fossil fuel companies here, guys? So much of insurance is about making money off of, their investments in the oil and gas industry, and seems a little, I don't know, questionable, but I think there are sort of these massive structural changes at the level of how our government and capitalism work that need to be rethought of as we are more and more confronted with these issues of massive disasters in our communities. I do think that this piece around what do Altadena Palestinians want to move forward is a really important one to not lose.
Yep.
Of what does a community defined plan look like, in a way that we can make sure that we are not erasing histories of places. I think Altadena is a very, very good example of that. And hopefully, I think there's actually been quite a lot of productive conversation around how to do that moving forward. But, I just think of what are these questions multifunctional, multi-beneficial spaces look like? How do we build in a way that is, economically beneficial, that is community beneficial and ecologically beneficial, that we can really start to shape the ways that we all want to exist in the world. We want our kids, our grandkids to exist in the world. But I think there's only so much of that can happen at the local level. And there's a lot of at the state level that needs to happen, and then at the federal. And I think there's a very, very big question mark about what is happening at the federal level from an environmental point of view over the next 4 years. But I'll leave it there.
I know we're out of time. So affordable housing in 30 seconds, impossible. When we do our community outreach here in Pasadena, the number one thing that the community wants is affordable housing. And it's something that my company invests in, kind of middle income, affordable housing. So this is across the country, every municipality is struggling with it. And I think I kind of go back to, and we're in a really tough headwind situation right now, which Stephanie and Lauren just mentioned. I mean, one is the tariffs, availability of labor is pushing up replacement costs. Now we have surge demand with what's going on here. So our construction costs are really indeterminate right now. So if I look at an affordable project, I'm working on one right now with Huntington Hospital. We're looking to develop, roughly 110 unit project. Our construction costs are coming in at about $600,000 per unit. And, most people can buy and sell apartments in this kind of middle income at $250,000 to $300,000 per unit. So there's a massive disparity there in terms of the cost to build versus, acquisition costs. So that gap has to be committed and filled with philanthropy, CBO, community-based organizations, or people contributing land, or some other larger subsidy coming from the private sector, like Google will provide employee housing and provide developers with mezzanine financing in order to get the financing so that it works. So these are the solutions that will narrow the gap for affordable housing here in Los Angeles. But you just can't all come from, the city. It can't all just come from the developer. There has to be the third part, like what we're trying to do at Huntington, and do our part and subsidize the nurses and our employees so that they can afford an $1,800 rent versus a market rent to make that project break even be more like almost like a $2,800 rent. That's where the crucible is of affordability and feasibility. And it's a big gap right now, but there's so many passionate people working on it. I'm optimistic that we're going to find a solution.
Well, we are over time, but I mean, we could have gone another hour. This has been incredibly enlightening. I love this where we started, this point about change versus continuity, and I think that's one thing that'll stick out to me. But we've covered so much ground. Thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you to this panel for the insight. Thank you.